He walked into the dealership with full financing, a stable job, and a dream. But before he could even touch the steering wheel, the police had already been called. What happened next had an entire city talking. It was a crisp Saturday afternoon in Richmond, Virginia, when Malik Jordan, a 38-year-old civil engineer, pulled into Hillside Auto Center in his weathered Toyota Camry. For 2 years he had skipped vacations, worked double shifts, and tucked away every bonus, all for this moment. The Cadillac Escalade had been more than a goal. It was a symbol of everything he had earned. Malik wasn't just browsing. He had researched every trim, every tech spec, and walked in with a pre-approval letter in hand. All he needed was a test drive, a signature, and a handshake. But in a place where assumptions move faster than facts, even a prepared man could be treated like a question mark. Malik stepped through the glass doors of Hillside Auto Center, dressed with quiet precision, white button-down shirt neatly tucked into crisp khakis, folder in hand, every detail intentional. The dealership was unusually quiet for a Saturday, the kind of hush that feels staged rather than natural. A young white salesman named Chase, maybe 26, spotted Malik from across the showroom and walked over. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but edged with indifference. Malik extended his hand with a slight nod. "I'm here to check out the 2024 Escalade. I have pre-approval through Capital First. Everything's in here." He handed over the folder, but Chase barely glanced at it, didn't even take it from his hand. "You know that model's not cheap," he said flatly. Malik kept his voice calm. "I'm aware. I've done the math. I'm comfortable with the numbers. Just need a test drive and we're good to go." There was a pause, not quite long enough to call awkward, but enough for Malik to feel the subtle weight of scrutiny. Chase finally offered a tight nod. "All right, let me grab the keys," he said, then hesitated. "Actually, the Escalade a high-ticket item. I need to check with my manager first." Malik's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air, a sense that this was no longer just a car purchase, but something else entirely. Chase turned and walked off without another word, leaving Malik standing alone in the middle of a space built for people to feel important. The glossy floors, the strategic lighting, the espresso machine in the corner, all designed to impress. And yet, for Malik, they only seemed to highlight how quickly confidence could curdle into discomfort. He didn't fidget, didn't look at his phone, didn't pace. Years in engineering had taught him that calm was power. But even as he stood still, the gears of his mind turned. He had seen this play before, the skepticism wrapped in courtesy, the unspoken need to verify his worth. And all he could think was, if I looked different, would we already be out back with the keys in hand? Chase returned a few minutes later, alone. "Manager's on his way out," he said, without elaborating. Malik gave a brief nod, folding his hands calmly in front of him. The air was quiet again, but this time it wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the kind that makes you brace for something you didn't ask for. A few minutes later, a taller man in a fitted navy blazer and tightly knotted tie emerged from behind a side hallway. Greg, the floor manager, 45, graying at the temples with the stiff posture of someone who rarely needed to prove himself. He approached Malik with a firm handshake that barely touched skin and a look that asked questions before his mouth did. "So what do you do for a living?" Greg asked, skipping any pleasantries. Malik met his eyes without hesitation. "I'm a structural design engineer. I work with Mid-Atlantic Civil Group. We're currently handling an expansion project out by Deep Run." Greg nodded but didn't seem interested. "And what's your annual income?" The question came blunt, like it had been asked 100 times, but not likely to every customer. Malik kept his tone measured. "It's in the 6 figures, all outlined in my pre-approval letter from Capital First." Still, Greg didn't glance at the folder Malik offered. Instead, he folded his arms. "And why the Escalade? That's a lot of car." "Because it fits what I need," Malik replied. "I've got 2 nieces I help shuttle around. I drive long distances for site visits, and I appreciate tech features that make those trips easier. I've researched this model for over a year." Another nod from Greg. No reaction, no acknowledgement. Just silence. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away with Chase trailing behind, leaving Malik standing alone again in a space filled with polished steel and quiet suspicion. 15 minutes passed. The seconds moved slower under fluorescent lights, punctuated only by the distant sound of someone closing a printer tray. Malik checked his watch. He didn't pace, but his jaw tensed. He hadn't expected this, hadn't prepared for a battle over trust when he walked in with clean paperwork and good credit. When Greg finally returned, his tone was overly casual, like nothing had happened. "Mr. Jordan, do you mind stepping into my office for a moment? Just need to confirm a few things." Malik followed, his shoulders squared, his expression unreadable. The office was glass-walled, spotless, almost sterile. Greg gestured to the chair while standing himself. "Would you mind emailing your financing documents? I'd rather have them digitally." Malik obliged, pulling out his phone and sending over the PDF. "Here's everything Capital First sent me. Exact same as what's in the folder you didn't open." Greg typed slowly on his desktop, then looked up. "Do you have a LinkedIn account?" "Excuse me," Malik asked, eyebrows narrowing. "LinkedIn, just want to verify your employment lines up. Cross-check your info." From the hallway, Chase leaned against the doorframe like he was waiting for a verdict. "You do this with every customer?" Malik asked. "You check LinkedIn for the guy who just test drove the Tahoe 10 minutes ago." No answer. Greg kept typing. Malik let the silence hang before adding quietly, "This doesn't feel like a confirmation. It feels like an interrogation." Neither Greg nor Chase said a word, but the message had already been sent. Malik stayed composed, but the shift in the room was undeniable. While Greg pretended to type, Malik caught a subtle glance exchanged between him and Chase. Then Greg quietly picked up the desk phone, turning slightly away and lowering his voice. Malik couldn't hear every word, but certain phrases cut through. "Just being cautious. Not sure if it's legit. Could be fraudulent paperwork." Malik's heart sank, not from fear, but from the exhausting familiarity of what was unfolding. He stood slowly, steadying his voice. "Is there something in my paperwork that raises concern? Because everything I've given you is verified and legitimate." Neither man responded. Greg ended the call without making eye contact, pretending nothing had happened. Malik didn't push. He already knew. The weight of suspicion didn't need to be shouted to be felt. He stepped out of the office and leaned against the edge of a nearby desk, glancing briefly at the clock. It had been nearly an hour since he'd arrived. The SUV he came to buy was still untouched, and now, instead of test driving it, he was preparing for what came next. Less than 10 minutes later, a black and white cruiser pulled into the dealership lot. Lights off, but presence unmistakable. Two officers stepped out, one older, Officer Simmons, and a younger woman beside him, Officer Lopez. They moved with practiced calm, scanning the room as they entered. Malik didn't move. His body was still, but his mind raced with every story he'd ever heard. Stories like his, that ended differently. Officer Simmons approached. "Sir, can we speak with you for a moment?" Malik gave a measured nod. "Of course. What's this about?" "We received a call from the dealership. There were concerns about some documents." "I have nothing to hide," Malik replied calmly. He pulled out his ID and the printed financing documents and handed them over without hesitation. "Everything's in order. I'm here to buy a car. That's it." Officer Lopez took the papers and began reviewing them on her tablet, cross-referencing the approval number and financial institution. Malik remained still, arms by his side, gaze steady. He wasn't going to feed the narrative. A calm man isn't dangerous, that's what they say. But Malik knew better. Even calm men get handcuffed. Even prepared men get profiled. Behind the glass walls of the manager's office, Greg and Chase watched nervously, trying to appear busy. Officer Lopez looked up. "Everything checks out. His financing is solid. No issues flagged." Officer Simmons exhaled quietly and turned to Malik. "We're sorry you were put through this." Malik nodded once. "It's not the first time, but it should be the last." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand answers. He just stood there, one man surrounded by luxury cars and quiet judgment, knowing full well this wasn't about a vehicle. It was about value. Theirs and his. Theirs and his. In the corner of the dealership's waiting lounge, a woman in her early 50s had been quietly observing everything unfold. Denise Walker, a high school history teacher from Richmond, had come in for a routine oil change and ended up witnessing something far from routine. As the officers spoke with Malik, Denise pulled out her phone and began recording. She hadn't meant to get involved, but something about the way he stood, silent, respectful, and yet surrounded by doubt, struck a nerve. After the officers confirmed Malik's documents and returned them, Denise stepped forward. Her voice was steady, but carried the kind of weight only truth could hold. "I've been here the whole time," she said, loud enough for everyone in the showroom to hear. "That man did nothing wrong. You just didn't like the way he looked." A hush fell over the room. No one moved. Greg shifted behind the glass, his face pale. Chase looked down at his shoes. Malik turned slightly, offering Denise a brief, grateful nod, but said nothing. He didn't need to. The moment had already spoken volumes. Denise uploaded her video later that evening with a simple caption. "Black man tries to buy a car. They called the cops. You tell me what part of this makes sense." No hashtags, no filters, just raw, unedited footage of dignity being met with suspicion. The post spread like wildfire, first among her students, then across Richmond, and by the next morning it had crossed state lines. TikTok lit up with duets and commentary. Instagram accounts with thousands of followers reshared the video, often pairing it with messages of frustration, disbelief, and painful familiarity. On Twitter, the hashtags number buying while black and number Hillside profiling began trending before noon. By lunchtime, a local news outlet ran a segment titled "Man Profiled at Richmond Dealership," featuring Malik's silent confrontation with police and Denise's firm declaration. The piece ended with a still of him standing beside the SUV he never got to test drive. Civil rights organizations reposted the clip, calling it yet another example of how systemic bias shows up in everyday spaces. In banks, in classrooms, and now, once again, on the showroom floor. Emails began flooding Hillside Auto Center's inbox. Phone calls jammed their front desk. Their Google and Yelp ratings plummeted as former customers and outraged strangers left one-star reviews, many simply writing, "We saw the video." But it wasn't just the dealership's reputation that was under fire. It was the idea that someone could do everything right, show up prepared, and still be treated like a threat. Malik's story wasn't just his anymore. It had become a symbol, a mirror, and for many, a final straw. Inside the dealership, employees moved with awkward energy, unsure whether to continue business as usual or brace for what was clearly coming. Outside, Denise stood near her car, phone still in hand. She hadn't expected to be part of any movement, but now that she wasn't backing down. She had seen what happened, and more importantly, so had the world. Malik didn't hesitate when Greg finally emerged from his office, awkward and pale, offering to resume the sale as if nothing had happened. "Mr. Jordan," he began, trying to regain control of the narrative, "if you're still interested in moving forward, we'd be happy to finalize the paperwork." But Malik stood firm, his voice steady and unwavering. "I'm not buying a car from a place that questioned my worth before they even opened my file." With that, he turned and walked out of Hillside Auto Center, leaving behind the gleaming Escalade and a room full of employees who suddenly looked very small. The fallout came fast and loud. Within 24 hours, Hillside's social media pages were overwhelmed with thousands of comments. Most of them angry, disappointed, and vowing never to return. Their Google rating dropped from 4.6 stars to 2.1 overnight. Dozens of customers cancelled upcoming service appointments. One local family posted a video of themselves shredding a sales contract from Hillside stating, "We don't support profiling." Internally, the dealership scrambled to contain the damage. Greg, who had worked there for nearly a decade, was placed on indefinite suspension. Chase, after being publicly identified on Twitter and TikTok, deleted all his accounts. Hillside issued a statement, but it was vague and cold. "We are reviewing our procedures and remain committed to respectful service." No mention of Malik, no apology, just corporate distance. But the community wasn't having it. Civil rights groups staged small protests outside the dealership, holding signs that read, "Customers not suspects," and "Dignity costs nothing." News outlets continued running updates, and Denise's video was picked up by national news aggregators. The dealership's owner, a man known more for profits than principles, reportedly held closed-door meetings for damage control. Meanwhile, Malik kept a low profile. He declined interviews, ignored most of the press requests, and turned down several offers from lawyers eager to file discrimination lawsuits on his behalf. He didn't want a court battle. He wanted respect. And respect, as he saw it, came not from shouting, but from showing up and being seen for who you are. A few days later, he received a message that caught him off guard. Crestline Motors, a family-owned dealership on the other side of Richmond, reached out personally. The owner, Leland Carter, wrote, "Mr. Jordan, we saw what happened. If you're still looking for a vehicle, we'd be honored to earn your trust. No assumptions, no scrutiny, just service." Malik sat with the message for a day before responding. The following afternoon, he drove across town, pulled into the Crestline lot, and was greeted at the door. Not with suspicion, but with a handshake. Leland himself offered him coffee, walked him through the options, and didn't once question his credentials. They talked cars, specs, family, road trips, normal things. 2 hours later, Malik signed the papers for a charcoal grey 2024 Escalade. No police, no second guessing, no LinkedIn profile required. Just a man buying a car like anyone else. As he drove off the lot, the leather seats warm beneath him and the sun slipping low behind the trees, Malik exhaled for the first time in days. It wasn't just the ride, it was what it represented. He hadn't won by fighting, he had won by holding the line. A few days after the dust had settled and the headlines began to fade, Malik posted a photo to his social media. His new charcoal grey Escalade parked in his driveway, the setting sun casting a warm glow across the hood. He stood beside it, not posing, just present. Hands in his pockets, expression calm. The caption read simply, "Respect isn't a reward. It's the bare minimum we all deserve." I didn't need an apology. I needed fairness from the start. Speak up, because when you stay silent, this keeps happening. The image quickly gained traction, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. It wasn't about a car anymore. It was about dignity. Malik hadn't raised his voice, hadn't thrown accusations or made threats. His strength had been in his stillness, in refusing to let someone else define his worth. As the story continued to circulate, messages poured in from people across the country, teachers, veterans, parents, young professionals, each with their own version of Malik's moment. One young man wrote, "I work in sales. Last week someone assumed I was the janitor. I almost quit. Your story helped me hold my head higher." Another woman shared, "My son watched your video. He's 10. He asked, why didn't they believe him? I didn't have an answer, but now we're talking about it." What Malik had sparked was larger than a viral moment. It was a conversation about how we see people, about the subtle but corrosive ways bias shows up not just in institutions, but in everyday transactions. It was about the assumptions made before a word is spoken, and how costly those assumptions can be, not just to the person targeted, but to the credibility of the place doing the targeting. And it was about the quiet power of not shrinking when you are treated unfairly, but standing firm with grace. The story of Malik Jordan isn't just a cautionary tale, it's a mirror. It reminds us that appearances are not indicators of intent, and that treating someone with dignity should never require justification. In a world where judgment is too often made before facts, where customer service can be tainted by quiet suspicion, this story makes one thing painfully clear. No one should have to prove they're worthy of respect. Wearing khakis or designer shoes, driving a Camry or a Benz, none of it should determine whether you're treated like a guest or a threat. Malik showed that strength doesn't have to be loud. It can be calm. It can be patient. It can be choosing to walk away with your head high when the room tries to shrink you. For those working in service industries, this is a wake-up call. The moment you assume based on appearance, you risk everything, from a sale to your reputation. And if you've made mistakes, don't apologize just to protect your image. Apologize because you understand the pain your actions caused. Real change doesn't start with statements. It starts with empathy, with hiring better, training smarter, and listening harder. And for everyone watching from the sidelines, remember this. Silence doesn't protect peace. It prolongs injustice. Speak up, share stories. Challenge what feels normal if it hurts someone else, because one calm voice, when amplified, can shift the whole room. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, hopeful, or more aware, don't scroll past. Hit that subscribe button to follow more powerful real-life stories that spark conversation and push for change. This is X Daily Stories channel, where silence ends and truth begins. Let's keep talking. Let's keep challenging ourselves. Let's keep listening.